The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Welcome to the Sample Chapter podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. Here's your host, Jason A. Meiske.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 168 of the Sample Chapter podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. And this week we are talking with Alaskan author Stephen C. Levi. He is the master of the impossible crime, which you're going to find out what that means and what that's all about here coming up, because he's got some fantastic stories to share. Along the way, we're going to be talking about his deep love for Alaska, which comes across whenever he's talking, plus sharing that love through his stories. We're going to hear how he bedazzles his detectives that appear in his stories with these incredible crimes. You know, like I said, the impossible crimes that you hear about, finding stories no one has heard before, tips on writing, and you're going to also learn what not to ask if you're ever visiting Alaska. That and so many more things. You might even hear my puppy in the background, my brand new puppy, Ruby. She had to stay with me that day, so it actually interrupted us a couple of times, but I think I got all that out, but still possible you might hear that. But through it all, I had a really good time talking with Stephen. And when it comes to his reading, we're doing something just a little bit different this week, as the story that you're hearing that he's reading from is actually an article that he wrote, and I think later it may be becoming like a short book. It's a really fun story that he's sharing, but the book cover that you see on the episode art is the human face of the Alaskan Gold Rush, which we talk about a whole lot throughout the episode and focus on there at the end as well. So a little bit different than our usual setup. Usually the story that you hear is the same cover art on there, but you know, we're trying something a little different and showcasing two pieces of his work in this way. So it's really cool. I think it's a really cool setup, and we're going to try this out and see how it goes. I think you're going to enjoy it, though. And I think if you follow the link in the show notes, you're going to see that Stephen has a lot to offer. So you can also check out his other books and follow him on social media as well. Don't forget to follow us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We post on there pretty regularly. I've been able to post. Actually, last week I think was my best week so far after having recovered from COVID for posting things. I'm going to step that up some more this week and in the weeks to come, being able to manage my time a little bit better again now that I'm getting caught up on some other stuff. If social media is not your thing, you can send us an email at samplechapterpodcast@gmail.com. Leave me a voicemail by calling 660-851-1146, and as always, you leave me a voicemail, I may play that on an upcoming episode. One of the exciting things I've been working on in the background, been working on it for, oh my gosh, almost a year now, I think. We have a TeePublic store now available for the show. And it's really cool. We got 2 designs available for the show so far, and a couple of actually designs that were put together based on my own books in the store. But we have more designs coming, more designs for the show being made up as it is right now. But right now you can head over to the link in the show notes for our TeePublic store. They do sales all the time there. So I'm going to try and post regularly whenever those sales are going on. Currently for the show, you can pick up t-shirts, coffee mugs, sweaters, notebooks even, pillows, lots of different items available for the designs that we have. You can get just the show name, Sample Chapter Podcast, the regular logo, so it's the black background with gold lettering, and you can get that set up. Or we have a new one so far has come in, which is a book that has a world coming out of it, and it's, you know, sample chapters from all over the world, which I think is pretty, I think that defines the show pretty well. And it's a nice looking logo, and we're gonna come up with some more. We have more coming, and as soon as those are available, they'll be right there in that TeePublic store. So if you're interested, if you want to show off swag and show your support, then make sure you order some. And whenever they come in, make sure to take a picture and tag us on social media. Well, I want to go ahead and start thanking our sponsors and podcast friends alike, starting with our affiliate, Audible. We've been with them for a little while and having a good time sharing the links to get a free 30-day trial, which comes with a free Audible book. I use Audible all the time. I listen to, oh my gosh, I think half my books throughout the year that I read, quote, read, I'm reading through Audible. I really enjoy the service. I think it's a good service, and I love audiobooks. So check out this advertisement on how you can grab the free 30-day trial and get your first book.
Hello friends, Jason here, and I wanted to take a moment to tell you about a great offer from Audible. Like you, I'm very busy. I have a full-time job, a family, I'm a thriller author, and I do this weekly podcast. But I also love to read. That's where Audible is a lifesaver for me. Whether I'm mowing the yard, working out, driving back and forth to work, or doing some other menial task, I can still listen to an incredible book through Audible. And now you can get a free 30-day trial by going to audibletrial.com/samplechapter. By doing that, you'll not only have that 30-day trial, you'll also gain access to guided wellness programs, theatrical performances, A-list comedy, exclusive Audible originals, and even podcasts like the Sample Chapter podcast. Last year is the first time I ever achieved my own personal reading goals, and it was because of some wonderful titles I listened to on Audible. Some of those titles were Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline, narrated by Will Wheaton, the Awaken Online series from Travis Bagwell, narrated by David Stiefel, Patient Zero by Jonathan Mayberry, narrated by the incredible Ray Porter. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention previous guest Scott Meyer with his Magic 2.0 series, narrated by Luke Daniels. It's a lot of fun and definitely worth your time. Hey, full disclosure, by signing up at audibletrial.com/samplechapter, the show does get a little monetization, which goes directly towards any production needs with the show. So you're also helping us out here by signing up. So what are you waiting for? Head on over now to audibletrial.com/samplechapter and start your free 30-day trial today.
All right, yes indeed. Thank you so much to Audible for being an affiliate with the show. A sponsor of the show now is Scrivener writing software. My favorite writing software. I make no secrets about that. They've been with us for about 2 years now, maybe a little more than that, actually. I just absolutely adore using Scrivener for all of my writing now. Writing the series that I'm writing, it's so important to have all your notes on characters and places and events, and I have it all right there on the left-hand pane. It's all organized for me, along with each of my chapters, and I've talked before about how cool it is that because the chapters are broken down, you can actually move them around, change things up. If you realize this chapter doesn't work anymore, it needs to come later or sooner in the story. So many options, and there's Ruby right now, actually. So many things that you can do. Hey, check out this advertisement and learn how you can save 20% on the regular desktop version.
Jason here. Hey, I wanted to take a moment and tell you about my favorite writing tool, Scrivener. Now, I know you've heard about Scrivener because their writing software has been embraced by hundreds of thousands of other writers like you and I, from the novice to best-selling novelists. The reason we all use it is because of Scrivener's core concept to bring all the writing tools you use together in a single application. And with tools like automatic backup, character maps, project goals, and let's not forget that amazing corkboard, you can see why I use Scrivener every day. As a bonus for Sample Chapter podcast listeners, use code CHAPTER for 20% off your desktop version. Scrivener writing software, built by writers for writers.
Okay, I also want to start off by thanking our podcast friends, starting with Pop Goes the Culture, home to a little over a dozen shows like the Multiverse Tonight, Fellowship of the Geeks, Amazing Nerd Show, Two Dads Review, 417 Funko, The Way Awesome Show, The Backlot by Alamo Drafthouse. Oh gosh, I hope that show comes back. And of course, the flagship show, Pop Goes the Culture podcast. Hey, click that link in the show notes for Pop Goes the Culture so you can follow along every Thursday night whenever they are live. You can actually tune into the show and interact with them, leave them comments, and vote on some things. Right now they're doing a contest on the best 90s movie. We got defeated. Yep, it was determined that the fans preferred a different movie over my selection. So, oh well, it's still a lot of fun going on over there, and well worth your time to check out all the different shows at Pop Goes the Culture. So click that link in the show notes. I also want to thank Project Entertainment Network, home to about 35 different shows with a wide variety of interests, whether it's writing, whether it's old horror movies or monster movies, just so many things to offer. You have comedy, debate, book shows like myself, like this one, the Sample Chapter podcast. Just so much more than I have time to run down the list. But check out this advertisement for one of those amazing shows.
Welcome to Wild Speculation, a podcast where each episode is a short story that explores one of the many strange, wonderful, and sometimes disturbing worlds of speculative fiction. You can find us at wildspeculation.buzzsprout.com, on the Project Entertainment Network, and wherever else you find podcasts. So sit back, enjoy the story, and let your imagination run wild.
All right, thank you so much to Project Entertainment. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get us on over to our interview with Stephen C. Levi and listen to some of these incredible stories about Alaska. Hello, Sample Chapter listeners. Welcome back to another exciting episode. Hey, this week we are jumping up to actually a place I am familiar with, and only the second time ever that the show has been up in Alaska. This time we are going up to Anchorage, Alaska to have a chat with author Stephen C. Levi. He is an Alaskan historian and writer, a 40-year resident of Anchorage with 80 books in print and Kindle. His nonfiction books on Alaska history include Boom to Bust in the Alaskan Goldfields, her historical forensic investigation into the sinking of Alaska's ghost ship, the Clara Nevada, as well as a history of Alaska's bush pilot heritage, Cowboys of the Sky, which to me, that sounds amazing. I've seen those guys in action. Levi believes that his books, both fiction and nonfiction, should be readable, understandable, and educational, and he lives by the title Master of the Impossible Crime, which you're going to hear all about today. Welcome to the show, Mr. Stephen C. Levi.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I am very happy to have you on. Like I said, this is only the second time I've been to Alaska with the show. Previously, I had somebody up in Fairbanks that I got to talk to, so that's where I had lived for a couple of years, so I had a lot to talk about there, but I have been to Anchorage a couple of times. How are you doing there? Is everything going well? You're getting by with the pandemic?
Oh, the pandemic's not the big problem up here. The big problem up here is oil, because our economy is based on oil. And as you know, what's happened now, the price of oil is dropping, which means state income is dropping. And, you know, the renewable energy is coming in. So we're looking at kind of the end of the oil industry up here, which is too bad because that's where we made most of our money.
Right. And I think didn't the Iditarod just kick off here recently?
Yeah, the Iditarod started on Sunday, and it's on its way. All of the mushrooms are on their way to Nome. It's this year because the snow is pretty deep after you get outside of South Central. And, you know, everybody gets up in the morning. The first thing they do is they turn on the television to find out where the mushrooms are.
That was something, you know, it's one of those things that I was aware of it, but I never really followed it until I became an Alaskan there for the couple of years while I was in the military. And then all of a sudden it's like, that's just life. It's dog mushing and snow. It's like, oh, we live. And the salmon run, of course. I got to go do that. I finally caught a king salmon my last year, just a few months before I left. I was so happy.
Yeah, well, this is Alaska. If it's during the summer, it's king salmon, and during the winter, it's Iditarod.
Absolutely. So let's see here. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are not a native Alaskan, if I'm correct.
No, I came up here from California about 40 years ago. As a writer, I have a motto, and the motto is that if you don't have something unique, you don't have anything. We do not need another novel about a detective that's fighting alcoholism, gets called in the best case of his life. And we don't need another book on George Washington. So I concentrate on coming up with something different. And my mysteries are called impossible crimes. And an impossible crime is one where the detective has to figure out how the crime was committed before he can go after the perpetrators. In The Vanishing Greyhound, it starts with bank robbers in a bank in San Francisco, and they want to get away with hostages, and they ask for a Greyhound bus. The cops say, gee, that's fine, because we'd rather have you in a Greyhound bus than in the bank. So the bank robbers put the hostages, $10 million, and themselves into a Greyhound bus, and they proceed to drive to Sausalito. If you're not from California, Sausalito is on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. And the cops say, that's fine. And what they do is they close off the bridge from the Sausalito side, let the Greyhound bus roll out there onto the Golden Gate Bridge and close off the bridge on the other side. So now you got the Greyhound bus in the middle of the Golden Gate Bridge. And they send their hostage negotiators out there, and there's no bus. The bus is gone. The bus has vanished. So now the detective has to figure out how you can make a Greyhound bus, disappear off the Golden Gate Bridge. And if the bank robbers already have the money, why do they have the hostages? So the whole book is designed to say that the detective is trying to figure out what exactly is going on here.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you sent me that snippet before when we were chatting back and forth on email, and I couldn't get enough of it. That was it's like, okay, this is going on my to be read file. I've got to check that out. That one and another one that got my attention, the Deserted Airliner. Which just another one sounds incredible. Give us a little bit about that.
Well, we have a plane that lands in Anchorage, here in Anchorage, and it lands with no pilot, no passenger, and no crew. But it left Seattle with a pilot, passenger, and crew, and it didn't stop along the way. And we know it's not little green men from Mars that have abducted these people, because now the kidnappers want $25 million in diamonds. So now the detective has to figure out, first of all, how you can have people disappear off a plane that's in the air. And second, can he do it fast enough so he doesn't have to pay off the ransom? Once again, it's one of these things. I want you to read my books, and I want you to be confused and trying to figure out what's going on right along with the detective until you get to the last page.
That is awesome. Now, these ideas, these wild ideas like this, which definitely have a hook to them, they certainly catch my my interest. Where do you come up with these ideas? Do you kind of think of what's the wildest thing I can think of, and then how could it happen?
Well, if you take a look at my short stories, because I've got about 100 of them out there, you can go see them on Readers and Writers on Facebook, or you can find them on Rope and Wire or on Medium. What I do is I start out with something that no one would steal, and then I try to figure out a way to make something that's worthless be part of a crime. For instance, in one of the stories, the detective gets called up and they say, we've got a problem here, maybe. Somebody stole 400 pounds of toothpicks. And the detective says, well, why are you calling me? And they say, well, because the toothpicks got stolen out of a secure location, and we don't know why they were stolen. We just know they were stolen, and we're just trying to figure out what's going on here. So now the detective has to figure out how you can take 400 pounds of toothpicks and use them in a crime. And so the whole story, this is a short story, not a novel. The whole short story is the detective trying to figure out what you can do with 400 pounds of toothpicks where somebody's going to end up using them in a crime and getting away with it. So what I do is I try to start with something that is not stealable and nobody would think about stealing, like toothpicks, and then turn them into stories. When it comes to the novels, what I try to do is from my novels, I try to figure out something that people would say, how do you ever come up with that? Like in my materializing armored car, I have an armored car that disappears in a tunnel. It's under guard and it disappears in a tunnel, but it's empty. So the question is, if you're going to steal an armored car, why are you stealing an empty one?
Right.
See, but what happens is, I want to keep people as confused as possible, as long as possible. And frankly, when the real thieves out there, the really, really bad people, they're not out there killing people, they're out there stealing money. And they're coming up with ways of doing it that just bedazzle the detectives. They really don't know what they're looking at until the last moment.
And how about the detectives? Is this a different detective each time? Or do you have it is? Oh my goodness.
The same detective each time.
Okay.
Short stories in the novels.
Oh, okay. Ah, goodness. That sounds incredible though. And I love the crossover with the the same detective in the short stories, but then standalone on the novels. That's really exciting. So now tell us about your nonfiction, because you have 80 books. This is nothing to laugh at here. You got quite the volume of books. I'm not even sure where to begin with some of these. So tell us about your inspiration behind the nonfiction.
But for nonfiction, again, what I'm looking for is something that nobody has done before. And I've been concentrating on the Alaska Gold Rush. When you talk about the Alaska Gold Rush, most people say, oh, I know all about the Alaska Gold Rush. I read Jack London and I read Robert Service. Well, Jack London and Robert Service had nothing to do with the Alaska Gold Rush. They had to do with the Klondike Gold Rush. And that's in Dawson, which is in the Yukon Territory of Canada. But so little is known about the Alaska Gold Rush that if you punch it up on Wikipedia, you get the Klondike. Klondike Gold Rush lasted about 14 months. The Alaska Gold Rush starts in 1880 and ends in 1945. So we're talking about a lot of times. And when you talk to people about the Alaska Gold Rush, they really don't understand it. They think, well, I got a big bunch of land and a bunch of guys running around with pans. Yeah, but there were a whole lot of stampedes. There were 3 different cities that have just boomed because of the gold rush. There's Nome, Fairbanks, and Juneau. And when I started working on the gold rush, Alaska Gold Rush, I found that most people, even Alaskans, really did not know that much about it, which I thought was great because that means when I jumped in and started looking at the federal files and the newspapers and stuff like that, I was looking at stuff that nobody had looked at in 100 years. That really makes it nice, is because now I'm discovering people that nobody has heard of. It's not like the lower 48 where somebody says, oh, I'm doing some research on so-and-so. And everybody goes, oh, yeah, well, he was somebody that. But when I come up with somebody out of the Alaska Gold Rush, people look at me like I've never heard of that guy.
Mm-hmm. That is really awesome. Now, how long does it take you to put something like that together with your nonfiction?
When you're doing the Alaska Gold Rush, I've been looking at documents for so long that what happens is that, for like 25 years. And so what happens is I'll work on one book and then I'll suddenly remember something else and go work on that. But when I want to sit down and actually do the book, I've done all of the background work. So it's just a matter of pulling the stuff together. When it comes to the novels, that's a little different because you want to make your novels to be similar to history, enough similar to history that people say, oh, I can see how that works. Mm-hmm. But what really makes it interesting are the individual people and the things that they did that are completely different in Alaska than any place else. Give you an example. Up in Nome, they had a bartender that was making all kinds of money, and they couldn't figure out how he was doing it because he was working as a bartender. And, and years later, it turns out that what he was doing is that when he got up in the morning and went to work, what he would do is he would put syrup in his hair. And in those days, in Nome, you didn't use money, you used gold. Nobody had cash the way we think of cash today.
Yeah.
So when he served a drink, what he would do is he would serve the drink and he'd take a certain pinch of gold out, to pay for the drink. And then after he had taken the gold out, he would run his fingers through his hair and he would take some of the flakes and some of the flakes would stick to his hair. So what happened is, after 8-9 hours of working as a bartender and every once in a while putting these little flakes of gold in his hair. He'd go home at night and he'd shampoo his hair, and then he'd pan the water. And I mean, this is fantastic little story. I mean, this little story, you're saying, boy, that is neat.
Yeah.
I've never seen that. I did research. I lived in California and did research on the California gold rush, and I never heard anything like that.
No. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh man. All right. I got to hear another one. What's another one of the unique ones that stand out to you?
1905 up in Eagle, which is a little tiny town. Eagle was formed when a bunch of people who were on the woodpile, means that they caught you doing something and they can't send you out to jail, so they have you cut wood for 6 months or something. So these guys, a bunch of guys from a woodpile in Dawson, decided they were going to set up their own little town. And so what they did is they crossed over into Alaska and they set up Eagle. That's how Eagle was founded. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys there is a guy named Robertson, and Erwin Robertson had come north to try to get enough money to build an airplane. And he finally did build an airplane in the 1920s. He built it himself, and he covered it in feathers, and he was going to see if it would fly, but it burned to the ground before he could fly. But in 1905, what happened is he had this bear that was bothering his cabin. So he shot the bear. They couldn't scare the bear off, so he shot it. Well, now he had a problem because the bear was pretty heavy and he didn't have a horse or a car to drag the carcass away. And if he left it there, wolves would come in and eat the carcass, and he'd have a wolf problem.
Yeah.
And he couldn't butcher the bear and try to sell the meat because people don't eat bear meat. And he couldn't eat the bear because he didn't have any teeth. He'd had scurvy and he had no teeth. So what he did was he went ahead and took the bear's teeth and he made a set of dentures and he ate the bear with its own teeth.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
I mean, these are the kind of stories you're getting out of the Alaska Gold Rush, and nobody, when I tell people some of the stuff I've never heard of that, they say that. And you say some of these little towns, they said, well, I knew that there was a boom town named that, but I didn't know they had a newspaper. And you say, well, yeah, you can go through and hear some interesting stories about people in these little tiny towns.
Yeah, I remember in my time up there hearing, you hear all kinds of tall tales in Alaska, and you hear about, of course, I heard about Chicken, Alaska, which is funny because I've won a few bets over time that people are like, no, there's no chicken in Alaska. Oh, yes, there is.
There is, yeah. You know why they call it Chicken? Why it's named Chicken?
I think I remember it, but go ahead, tell me.
They couldn't agree on the spelling of ptarmigan, so they settled for Chicken.
Okay, I knew it was something about spelling something else, but I couldn't remember what it was. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I hear they have great turkey sandwiches.
I wouldn't know, but chicken is not that large,
Yeah. Oh man, but yeah, there was that. Of course. Then there's the safety issues of avoid the snowbanks and things like that. Don't go on your roof in the middle of the winter because you can slide off and they won't find you until spring.
Yeah, the thing about Alaska is people just do not understand Alaska. They think that we're just like every other state. But look at it this way. If you don't know Alaska, when you get on a plane in Seattle and you fly to Anchorage, which is the largest city in the state, you fly for 4 hours. And when you look down, there's nothing but forest. And then when you get to Anchorage, if you want to fly to Fairbanks, which is the second largest town in Alaska, what happens is you get on a plane and you fly for 2 hours north. And when you look down, if you're lucky, you can see a row, but most of the time you just see forest. And all of Anchorage are only 600,000 people, which in the lower 48, that's not a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But Alaska has 365 million acres of land. I mean, that's just staggering. It's twice the size of Texas, and it's got 600,000 people.
It was a beautiful place. I really loved it. I wonder now how smart it was to camp out behind the base as much as I did on my own. The first time I was out camping and I could smell something terrible was the last time I did it without a gun. But that's when I realized, like, okay, there's something's dead out here. I should probably have something to help. But
When you see a brown bear, I don't care how many times you've seen a stuffed brown bear. The first time you see a brown bear, a real live one, you are shocked. I mean, I lived in Alaska for a long time. The first time I saw my brown bear, even I was shocked. Because when it stood up, it's 8 feet tall. It's 2,000 pounds, and it can run at 45 miles an hour.
It's amazing. Yeah, and the whole time I was there, I never saw a bear, aside from a couple of black bears. We lived in Colorado for a while. I saw plenty of black bears there, but the moose, that's what surprised me. It was just, I never realized how tall they were. And I had twice where I would go fishing and walk the trails behind the base, and I turn a corner and there's a moose and I looking at each other, and I'm like, oh, hi, I'm gonna go back this way, let's stay out of the way. Because I'd never heard until I got to Alaska how you got to watch out for moose. They will trample you and they will kill you.
Oh, they're so stupid. I mean, they don't, you can't scare them. You just avoid them.
Oh my gosh. So now how long have you been writing for? When did this start?
I started writing when I was in elementary school, because someday one of my books will make me $1 million. I'm still waiting. But it's been quite a while. And as a writer, what happens is over the years, you learn all of the things that you did wrong. That's the one thing about writing, is that you keep learning things that you did wrong, not necessarily things that you did right. If you do something right and you succeed, it was by accident. But the most important thing about writing, as I keep saying, is that make it different, make it new, make it unique. And if there are writers listening to you, if you've read a plot line before, don't ever use that. Come up with something new. See, about 10 years ago, before 10 years ago, books in bookstores were published by publishers who wanted to make money. And so what they did is they published books that they thought would make money. They didn't publish good books. They published books that they thought would make money. Mm-hmm. Now with the internet, anybody can write a book. And so now this is the golden age of literature coming up, is because now if you're looking for a unique book with a unique plot line, you can find it on the internet, which is a reason that you should be writing things that are different.
Absolutely. Well, something that is definitely different, one of your most recent books, The Human Face of the Alaskan Gold Rush. Give us some insight to that. This sounds amazing.
We have to understand that by the time you get to the Alaska Gold Rush, this is 1896 to 1905, roughly that period. What happens is everybody in the lower 48 is civilized. In other words, they have operating courts, they have operating newspapers. And so when you came to Alaska, a lot of these guys coming to Alaska were people who were going for the gold, but they're also running from things. So what happens is you have a lot of criminals that are coming up here and kind of fading in. And one of the big things is that nobody had their own names. What they wouldn't say, I'm John Smith. He'd be up there for a while and he'd be this, I'm Wild Bear Johnny. Mm-hmm. And so you have all of these guys in the newspapers. You start reading it. You don't know who these people are. You just know that it's, Owl-Faced George and Wild Car Willie and stuff like that. And you start reading it, and then they'll commit crimes up here, and then they'll finally get caught. And you'll say, oh, wow, that's pretty neat. Here's a guy who came up here, tried to get away from the law and got caught because he was doing the same thing up here that he was doing in the lower states. But it's up here, it is wild and free and very, very hard to explain to people. When you're talking about a city like Nome, you'll have to look at a map to see what I'm talking about. But the Bering Sea is going to freeze from the Aleutians all the way to the Arctic Circle. Okay, so what you're talking about, when you want to get into Nome, you can, by boat, you cannot get into Nome until about the 1st of June. And then when the Bering Sea freezes, if you're not out of Nome by September 15th, you're probably going to get frozen in for the winter. So in Nome, when you start talking about the gold rush in Nome, these people are stuck from September to June. And you can't get out. And if you don't have the food that you need, you starve. And it's a very, very rough time. Take the California gold rush, you could pretty much get into San Francisco anytime you wanted. Nome, Fairbanks, If you're stuck, once the Bering Sea freezes, you're stuck there for 7 months.
Mm-hmm. I never even thought about that because anytime I'd hear about the Alaskan gold rush, I think of going up into the mountains, panning the rivers, and such things like that. And you hear the rumors of they're practically picking it up off the ground, these giant nuggets. But Nome. Oh my gosh, that's just to be landlocked in like that for so long. I never even considered that.
Well, Nome is also unusual because most of the people that were making the money were on the beach. See, if you're on the beach, that's federal property, and you cannot stake it. You can mine it, but you can't stake it. So these guys would go out onto the beach. Tide would go out. These people would go out onto the beach with their pans, and they would pan the sand out there, and they would do it for 12 hours until the tide came back in, and then they would come back in, and you could make thousands of dollars or nothing. But the beach is full of these people. Got to understand that during the Alaska Gold Rush, Nome was about 12 blocks deep and about 20 miles long.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even realize it was that was the dimensions.
Well, like I'm saying, it's a lot of people, they just do not know that much about the Alaska Gold Rush.
So give us a little bit of insight, some more information about this, the human face. Was there like a specific story about this, or a certain story in there that stands out, or something else, another nugget, if you will, for listeners to be interested in?
The Alaska Gold Rush, if you want to get into it, there are actually 3 different parts. And you have to understand, if you're from the lower 48, it's hard to explain. But if you live in California, you talk about the gold rush, you're talking about a whole bunch of people who go out and they stand around on a riverbank and they pan for gold. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, there's somebody that's called a mine. They have something called a mine where a bunch of people go into the ground and dig dirt out and try to get the gold out. In Alaska, we have 3 different parts of the gold rush that are completely different. There's Nome. Nome, the bulk of the people are out there on the beach and they're panning the beach. Yes, there were some mines in the back, but most of the people are out there on the beach and they're panning for gold. And they're locked in because once the ice comes in September, you're there until June. And on top of that, don't forget, if you take a look at your map, you will see how far north Nome is. There are no trees. There are no forests in Nome. What this means is that all of the wood that's going to build Nome has to come in by ship, and Nome had no wood to burn, and so they would have to bring in coal. We're talking about 10, 20 tons of coal that had to be brought in bags so that the people in Nome could make it through the winter without freezing. So that's one part of the gold rush. The second part of the gold rush is Fairbanks. Fairbanks is completely different. There's not a lot of gold that's lying around on the ground on the edge of the rivers. So what they do is they have to dredge for it. So Nome is a big dredging community. So a dredge, what happens at a dredge? You get a boat and you go out and you have a line of buckets, and you drop the buckets into the bottom of the river and they scoop up the soil from the bottom of the river and they dump it off in the dredge. And they get the gold out. The good part is that you get large nuggets because that's what you collect. The bad part is that you leave as much in the leavings as you got from the nuggets. So a lot of people today, when they want to go looking for gold, what they do is they go find where a dredge has left a bunch of material because they know there's gold in there. It's completely different. Then you go to Juneau, and Juneau is a hard rock mine. Nobody is out there with a pan in Juneau. What they did is they started drilling right into the mountains. And Juneau is completely different than the rest of the country when it comes to mining, is because if you were in California or you were in Nevada and you wanted to do mining, what you basically did is your miners or the people who worked in the mine would start at the top of the mountain. And they would get in a elevator, and then the elevator would take them down maybe 1,000 feet. And then they would start mining for gold 1,000 feet down. And they would put all of the rock and the soil and everything else that they got in these ore carts, and then they would put the ore carts on the elevator, and the elevator would take the the material back up to the top of the mountain where they would sort out the gold from the rest. In Juneau, it's completely different and much more profitable because the miners walked into the mine from the bottom. What happens is they're down at the shore. They just walk into the mine and walk up to where they're going to be working. They put the offal, the gravel and everything else into ore carts, and the ore carts just kind of just roll down courtesy of gravity. If you look at a picture of Juneau, you have to understand that the entire city of what you now call Juneau was made from the overburden that came out of the mine. So what happens is Juneau starts out as being no city at all, and they kept dumping boulders and rocks and gravel and everything else out of the mine, and it filled up in the Gastineau Channel, and that's what Juneau is built like. So what happens is when you start talking about the Alaskan Gold Rush, you're talking about three completely different ways that people were making the big bucks. And each town grew up. Juneau is a very sophisticated town. It's always been that way. There's been a lot of money in there. It comes from the mine. And if you lived there, you would find it very similar to a place like New York. Because what happens is there are the rich people and the poor people, and then the shops that the rich people go to and the restaurants that the rich people go to. You go to Fairbanks, hey, it doesn't make any difference whether you have any money. And what happens is everybody is in town and everybody goes everywhere. Mm-hmm. And Nome is the same way. Nome is so small that you can't really have anything special. But it's three completely different cities even today. And it's three completely different cities when you talk about the gold rush.
Yeah. And and it's, as you're saying that, I'm remembering while I was in Fairbanks, the gold panning and, they had sites you could go and try it out, and hearing about the gold dust and how most of us don't really think nothing of it, and a lot of people don't even know what they're looking at, and they're missing a lot of it. And you talk to some and you find out, like, at the end of the season, they'll go back through these areas where the civilians and the tourists have been panning, and then they clear that out, and they're finding pounds upon pounds and pounds of gold dust that almost pays for their season, just of what the tourists have lost, and how much is collected there in the bottom and such. Just amazing to hear all the different methods that it's there. It's just incredible.
But if you know what you're doing, you can't. Very few people make a living doing it, but a lot of people can make a lot of money in the mining process, and they can. A lot of the times, people are going through old spoil piles, and they're finding a lot of material. There's still a gold rush going on here. Just there are not many people involved.
So that's your most recent book, but we have another one we're going to be hearing from today, which is really, this is a lot of fun, and I can't wait to hear more about this. To Lie Like an Alaskan. Give us some insight into this.
You have to understand that in Alaska, we have a unique type of humor. It's called absurding. And I'll be reading a little story about that. Absurding is, you have to understand that in Anchorage, we have, when you talk to people who aren't living on the military base, there are about 250,000 of us. Of those, maybe the bulk of us never get downtown during the summer, because 1 million tourists will come through in June, July, and August. And when the tourists come in, they fill up the restaurants and everything else. But occasionally tourists will come to an Alaskan and they will ask a question. And most of the questions that we get asked about Alaska are unbelievably stupid. And they will say things like, well, this is the land of the midnight sun, right? And you say, yeah. And they said, well, what's it like during the winter? And you realize these people think that Alaska has 6 months of darkness, followed immediately by 6 months of unbroken sunshine. You're saying, where did you get your education? And so rather than tell them something like that, people will ask about penguins. Where can we see some penguins? And rather than tell them, look, the nearest penguins you're going to see are in Antarctica. They have nothing to do with Alaska. So what Alaskans do is they get tired of answering these questions. And so they just look at the person and they lie. They say, oh, you want to see some penguins? Well, they're down at the park strip. You can see them down at the park strip, but you have to go there early in the morning. And this is called absurding. What happens is the questions are unbelievable. I have been in a post office where they have tourists who are in the United States Post Office buying United States stamps with United States dollars from somebody in the United States Post Office uniform. And as they hand them the postcards, they say, how long is this postcard going to take to get to the United States?
Yes.
You say, it's kind of like, it's mind-boggling. No place else in the country will you have with something like that happen.
That is remarkable.
Okay, so
oh my gosh.
This is my story, To Lie Like an Alaskan.
Well, before we go into that, let me ask first, where can people find and follow you?
They can follow me on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And I have SteveLeviBooks.com. You can see my books. The best place to find my most recent books is Author Masterminds. Author Masterminds is a fantastic page. It's 18 different authors who are the best in their field. So if you're looking for a book, but you don't necessarily want a mystery, but you want something else like a book on faith or, or supernatural, or you want a ghost story, go to Author Masterminds, because what we did is we put the group together of people who were very, very good writers, but weren't competing each other on subject. It's an excellent place to find a book.
All right. Yeah. And I remember I checked that out whenever we first connected. And yeah, I never thought about LinkedIn being such a great place until I created my account here. It's incredible, all the authors that I have come across and met because of that. And you're one of them that we connected on there. And it's such a great place for an author community. So
for those people who are readers or writers, we're in a whole new world now. And what happens is that you have to go looking for the books that you want to read. It's not as easy as going into you could go into a bookstore and go to the mystery section and get a selection of books. That's gone. And so now what you have to do is you have to go looking for the books, which I think is great, because now you're finding stuff that the bookstores wouldn't carry. Bookstores, publishers for years would not publish my books because I don't kill people. Most mysteries, there is a murder. If you take a look even on television, when you start talking about a mystery program or a Law and Order program, somebody has to get killed. I don't like to kill people. So people say, well, if publishers would tell me, well, if you want us to publish your book, you have to have a murder. And I'm saying, well, I don't do murders.
Well, that is certainly a unique way to do it. So that way you've got your books that stand out the way you like them too. I think that's amazing, and I'm so happy that you've come on here. I'm so happy to have been able to learn something from you and hear about all your amazing books. So, gosh, everybody, make sure you click the link in the show notes for authormasterminds.com and Steve's website, and go to his Facebook. Click all those links and get over there and follow Steve and check out some of these books, because I'm adding several of them right now to my to be read file. So, and people, you got to do the same. Steve, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a real blast, and man, just bringing back some happy memories from my younger days as a young man. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Stephen C. Levi with To Lie Like an Alaskan.
When it comes to tall tales, Alaskans are king. No one can tell a whopper like an Alaskan. In fact, telling fabricated tales of Northland and being Alaskan goes hand in hand. This is not to say all Alaskans tell lies. Most of them do, though not all of them. But so many Alaskans have grown accustomed to telling wild tales about the Northland that the only person with a lower credibility than an Alaskan with a bear story is a politician proposing a tax cut 3 days before a primary election. And Alaskans have such easy marks. For the most part, outsiders, that is, people from the lower 48, are amazingly ignorant when it comes to Alaska. Though Alaska is a state of the United States, many Americans continue to believe that it's a different country, uses another form of currency, and requires a visa for travel. These same people, many of them with college educations, also fervently believe that Alaska is a land of ice and snow where the residents live in igloos and ranch penguins. In fact, in downtown Anchorage, it is not uncommon to hear tourists actually asking which restaurants serve blubber stew, the location of the nearest igloo, or where the northern lights go when the sun is up for 24 hours a day. During the summer, it takes Alaskans all of about 2 weeks to get tired of setting the record straight for outsiders. It's just too time-consuming for Alaskans to be truthful, because the number of visitors that flood the state during the summer months are into the millions. Anchorage, Alaska's largest city only has 265,000 people, but it hosts more than 1.5 million tourists in the 90 days of summer. That's quite a few people to set straight. After about the 15th of June, tired of constantly telling tourists there are no igloos in Alaska or that penguins are only indigenous to Antarctica, Alaskans begin to fudge on the truth. They aren't really lying. It's an Alaskan folk art form kindly known as absurding. More precisely, absurding is a technique similar to the tall tale. But it is different from the tall tale because the art of deliberately confirming whatever bizarre fantasy a tourist believes of Alaska, regardless of how incredible that may be, and then expanding the absurdity even further. For example, if a tourist were to ask where he or she might see a penguin nest, an Alaskan intent on absurding might respond, well, it's been a lean year for penguins because the alligators keep forcing them out of their beaver lodges. That's where they spend the summer, in beaver lodges. Well, this may sound like a bizarre answer. It's not. Astoundingly, tourists will believe just about any tale about Alaska, and the more fantastic the lie, the more believable it will appear to be. From giant man-eating crabs in the Kuskokwim River to a genetic cross between a moose and a walrus called an Alaskatalo, tourists are constantly being absurded by Alaskans who weave the most ludicrous stories from the threads of a tourist's imagination. What makes this so easy for Alaskans is the incredible diversity of the state. Since Alaska is so large, there are few statements that are true from Ketchikan to Barrow. Take the myth of Alaska's seasons. In the far north, Barrow, on the shore of the Arctic Ocean, the sun is aloft for months at a time during the summer. It does not set, as people in the lower 48 know the term, for 84 days. The sun simply circles the horizon. Time of day is indicated not by when the sun sets, but at what point of the compass it happens to be. Then there is the flip side of this good news. During the winter, there are 67 days in Barrow when the sun does not hop above the horizon. In other words, on November 18th, the sun sets and does not rise until January 24th. But in Anchorage and Fairbanks, there are sunsets during the summer and sunrises during the winter, just as there are in Seattle, Denver, Chicago, New York. But over the years, textbooks have mistakenly stated that Alaska, the land of the midnight sun, has 6 months of darkness and 6 months of light, leaving many college-educated Americans to firmly believe that Alaska has 6 months of pitch darkness, followed instantaneously by 6 months of unbroken sunshine. Living in Alaska also requires an adjustment to one's vocabulary. While most Alaskans speak English, many of the terms which Alaskans use daily are not even in uncommon usage in the rest of the country. Sitka slippers, for instance, are plastic boots with felt liners, which are preferred footwear in cities like Sitka, obviously, where the only time it isn't raining is when the storm clouds are gathering. A cache is a place to store food, and hooch is a cheap form of alcoholic beverage. Alaskans, to the distress of Chichakos, those are newcomers, frequently use such terms as taku, cuspic, chinook, Willowa, Orca, Muktuk, Blue Ticket, Lower 48, Pingo, Burn, Break, and Scrimshaw. While each of these has a specific Alaskan meaning, sometimes the use of the terms leads to humorous confusion. One evening, a news reporter called up public relations representatives for a large oil company, only to be told by the man's wife that he was outside. Outside to an Alaskan means the lower 48. Will he be gone long, the reporter asked, assuming he was in Seattle? I hope not, his wife said. He's only taking out the garbage. Alaskans also thrive on the difference between their state and the rest of the Union. Beards and bear stories are in, yuppies are out. Functional dress is expected. Three-piece suits is reserved for IBM salesmen and Xerox repair personnel. Backpacks are as accepted at business meetings as briefcases. Alaskan humor is different as well. Take Alaskan holidays. Every February, Cordova on the shores of Prince William Sound sponsors an iceworm festival to commemorate the beastie of Robert Service invention. Though there really are iceworms which live near the surface of glacier, the beast of Robert Service creation was a piece of spaghetti with inked-in eyes that was dropped into the glass of whiskey to bamboozle a Chichako. Honoring the iceworm, each year the citizens of Cordova conclude their iceworm festival with a parade highlighted by the appearance of a 150-foot iceworm that weaves its way along the parade route. Further north, Talkeetna sponsors a moose dropping festival with contestants involving another item of Alaskan humor, moose nuggets. In Anchorage, each November, there is the Alaskan Day Parade. Taken from a story in Warren Sitka's Sourdough Journalist, the Alaskan was a genetic cross between a moose and a walrus. Billed as the longest-running, shortest parade in American history, the Alaskan Day Parade is 1 block long down an alley. It's held the first Sunday after the third Saturday in November and begins at 12:03. If you want to march in the parade, Warren Sitka advises you better be on time. If you're 30 seconds late, the parade's half over. Alaskan humor is different because Alaska is different. While many regions of America can point with pride to their own homespun humorists, Alaska is not so fortunate. Mark Twain captured the spirit of Western humor, while Uncle Remus did the same for the South. In the East, there is Washington Irving. Alaska, however, is a land without a written heritage of humor. But Alaskans, one by one, each in his own and her special way, are changing that. One winter, as an example, during the Anchorage Fur Rendezvous, a bearded Alaskan was pawing through a pile of imported kangaroo pelts on the floor of a fur shop. Looking for just the right color combination to make himself a floppy hat, he was dividing the pelts into piles of possibility. Just as he was finishing, a tourist, fresh from the thrill of her first open-air fur auction, stepped into the shop and spotted this bearded character, clearly one of those grizzled sourdoughs which she had read so much about, with piles of pelts on the floor. Pulling out her camera and adjusting the focus, she asked what kind of pelts he was handling. Kangaroo, he said without looking up. Oh, really, she said. Are they Alaskan? An evil gleam flashed in his eye for a moment. Yeah, he grumbled without looking up. From up around Bethel. And right now, somewhere in upstate New York, there is some woman swearing to her friends that there really are kangaroo in Alaska.
All right, that was Stephen C. Levi reading To Lie Like an Alaskan. It's one of his articles that came out, but we also want you to check out The Human Face of the Alaskan Gold Rush, which we talked about throughout the interview. Don't forget to click the link in the show notes for Stephen and all of his social media. Also click that link in the show notes for our sponsors and podcast friends alike. We've also got that TeePublic link in there too, so you can go check out some of our merchandise now with more exciting things to come. And hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out next week when we're back with an all-new author, a new book, and a new sample chapter. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you again real soon.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.